Egypt has flourished throughout my reign, but now I sense the eyes of Set upon me, and dark times are coming.
Welcome ladies and gentlemen, Costin here with my review of Total War Pharaoh Dynasties, which may very well be the best historical Total War game to play at the moment, and certainly a significant turnaround for CA Sophia. Total War Saga Troy was not a particularly great game in a lot of ways, though it did have some very interesting features that was let down, especially because of the battle situation, the balancing between the Achaeans and the Trojans, all that. Pharaoh was the worst release in Total War history, and one of the things people need to remember about that is it was overpriced. The business model they were going with there was not great. They were at the point where they were offering skins to people, which hopefully we will never see from Creative Assembly again, because it wasn't a great situation to be dealing with over here. So what they have added in Dynasties, keeping in mind that CA is certainly making the right moves. We have the Khorne Greenskin Ogre DLC coming in, hopefully with major racial improvements, especially for Khorne and Ogres. We have 5.2, which apparently is going to bring campaign improvements, so I have no idea of any specifics. No one does, but they've stated outright that they're going to add quite a bit in 5.2, as well as a whole bunch of other things. And of course, we have the success of Thrones of Decay, which may very well be one of the best, if not the best DLCs that CA has ever released in their history as a company. So when their backs are against the wall, Creative Assembly can deliver on quality. And this is really one of the best Total War games I've played in a long time. Certainly, horrible at launch, much better at the moment. And I have to say, while I certainly haven't put the same amount of hours in this as I have in Warhammer 3, I've enjoyed playing a lot of campaigns. In fact, there's so much stuff to do over here that I kind of feel like I'm barely scratching the surface. But let's talk about what they've added, what they've changed, starting with what they've added over here in this intro section. So they've added the entire Aegean area and the entire Mesopotamian area, with all of the quote-unquote historical factions that were in that area. Well, as much as you can consider Troy, at least the way it's represented from myth, as being historical. There is a Troy. We know there was very likely a Trojan War of some kind, though we don't know the specifics, but archaeological evidence does point to that. So we have Troy, we have the Achaeans, we have Babylon, we have the Assyrians, and even the Cimmerians. So yeah, Conan the Barbarian couldn't help myself. So a lot of factions, map expansion. It's certainly not the biggest map, but one of the things I will say about this map is every area feels very distinct to play in because of the native units you can recruit, because of the gods that are in each area. When you're playing a campaign in Achaea or Greece, it's gonna feel very, very different than playing a campaign in Mesopotamia or Egypt or Canaan or Hatti. Different units, different problems, different terrain, and terrain that does feel like it actually has a significant impact. Different battle maps, which is actually in some ways greater than what you have in Immortal Empires, because yes, in Immortal Empires, you do have a wide variety of terrain and all that, but mountains are mountains, temperate is temperate, frozen is frozen, right? And just because a climate is named differently doesn't mean that the campaign gameplay is necessarily inherently differently than what you might experience in another area. Here it feels very distinct. So we get the Aegean, we get Mesopotamia, and we get the courts of the Aegean and Mesopotamia. And as well as having new ancient legacies to go for those. Be it Perseus and Atreus in the Aegean, and then the lawgiver and Sargon in Mesopotamia. So 4 new ancient legacies, 4 new major factions, and the ability of playing with minor factions, as well as new improvements to campaign customization, as well as changes to battle. Significant rebalancing in battles, and the addition of lethality. Some people don't have a great opinion of lethality, but let's talk on the subject of battles, how they've played in Troy, how they've played in Pharaoh at launch, and how they are significantly better to play at the moment. Now, one of the problems that has plagued Total War Troy, Total War Pharaoh, is the issue of battles. See, the problem is CA Sophia has gone through several steps to try and make battles, these infantry-focused battles, in the Bronze Age period interesting. In Troy, they had this idea of various types of infantry, like medium infantry, light infantry, all that kind of stuff. It didn't work out. The reason it didn't work out is because heavier infantry just ended up being better. And that combined with the small maps and settlements and field battles, but especially in settlements, it meant that units that could get through choke points were legitimately the best units you could have in a battle. That was a problem there. It's still a problem today, but they have taken steps to improve that. One of the things they tried to do when Pharaoh came out is like, oh, we're going to have more focus on terrain and battle maps. We're going to have different units handling different types of terrain better, different weather better. We're going to have more intensive weather effects, which can increase even further. It also didn't work. And now they've added lethality. Lethality is such a game changer for a couple of reasons. One, it makes it so that different kinds of units, even lighter units, have a lot more power behind them. It also makes it so that flanking, maneuvering are far more important. Because if you're hitting a unit from the front that has a good amount of durability, your lethality is not really going to matter as much, anywhere near as much, as it's going to matter in a flanking move. So even in settlement battles, I'm finding myself, at least in unwalled settlements, as opposed to sieges, I'm finding myself doing a lot of flanking maneuvers, doing a lot of maneuvering on the battlefield, seeking openings. It makes battles that much more interesting than they were before. And I gotta say, like, while Warhammer obviously has all kinds of units, like Gatling guns, flying units, magic and all that, in terms of pure infantry combat and range combat, Dynasties might have some of the best in the series. Like, one of the things someone mentioned in a comment on a video, imagine having hoplites, like imagine modding Dynasties. Well, like, Alexander the Great mod, where we could have hoplites pushing units or withdrawing wall information against enemy units. Now, those kind of things were added in Pharaoh at launch, but lethality seems to be that key ingredient that they've added in Dynasties that has significantly improved battles compared to where they were before. And this leads to more dynamic battles. It makes it so that while heavier units are still very, very important, particularly in terms of holding the line, lighter units are also very, very crucial. Sure, you might have an army like this, very heavy units, swordsmen or axemen, especially axemen seem to be the favorite. But different kind of units do fill different purposes. And then when you add in the addition of cavalry, which I know CA Sophia didn't want to add in the game, but I'm glad that they actually did, that the higher-ups in CA did push them to do so. When you add in all of those things into a battle, it creates a far more dynamic battlefield and a far more interesting one. The problem that still exists in battles, sieges are still not great, especially because of the way they're played. I've done a whole video on that. But essentially, all the sieges essentially boil down to, can you take the walls? If you can, you've won the battle. If you can't, you're done. And so you have these wonderful siege maps that they've designed, even for Dynasties, that are meaningless because it's not worth it. Thankfully, there are ways of bypassing the problems in sieges due to the improvement in auto-resolve when you're building siege equipment, a huge addition in that respect. Still problems, still things to do. But I think they're really on the right track, and it does seem that they're involving more of the developers from CA Sophia to really improve the game. Now, there have been people that in the Total War community who have stated this for years, that Yolosapien seems to be the kind of, the developers there seem to have really, really great ideas. That's true, but there's always been problems. But it does show you that, they can get the job done. The resource system that they implemented is fantastic. I wish they had kept them more in line with Troy as opposed to how it plays out in Pharaoh. But all the same, many significant improvements. And I gotta tell you, I was very skeptical of Dynasties coming out. I was skeptical because I didn't feel that they were going to be able to really improve battles. I just felt like, they're going to make a big map, but the fundamental problems of gameplay are still going to be the same. They aren't. Gameplay is much more improved. And again, I'm finding myself having a lot of fun in these battles because it used to be a slog of a situation. But now, you can still have very long, tedious battles if you don't play correctly. But if you're playing correctly, you can do a lot of damage to the enemy. Like, look at this battle right here. Like, fighting all over the settlement, fighting with a lot of units, doing flanking maneuvers, worrying about positioning, worrying about not being flanked. It's great, especially when you add in the benefit through campaign customization that really does a lot of morale damage, maybe a bit too much in this particular campaign, but a lot of morale damage when you're flanking enemy units. So, lots of things to like over here. One thing I do dislike heavily is how important each general is in a battle, although that's not necessarily inherently the issue in itself. Having generals being important for morale is okay, and one of the things they did do very well at the launch of Dynasties was the idea that, generals can't die so easily, right? The unit they're part of needs to take a certain level of damage before they can die. They can die at various points. I think there's the way the system works, so I could be wrong on this, feel free to correct me, but I think the way the system works is the more damage the general unit takes, the higher the chance that they can die. The problem is, as you can see here, there's 3 generals. One is the garrison general, one is the army general, and one is an outpost general. This gets ridiculous. So I'm fine with the idea of generals being impactful for morale, but I find that it's a fucking issue when every garrison has a general and they loves to build outposts just to screw you over. It adds nothing to the battle, so I think they should remove those generals, but the way the battles inherently work is much better. It's more of a case of certain things on the campaign affecting battles in a negative way, the outposts in particular. But overall, significant improvement with respect to the battles. Now, with the battle situation discussed and the improvements they brought to that, let's talk about the campaign in greater detail. What's changed? What has improved? Well, not really all that much. Overall, though, you have a bigger area, you have more gods, you have more ancient legacies. However, due to various additions to campaign customizations and the massive improvement in battles, I will say that I find campaigns significantly better. Like, I felt Pharaoh at launch was very limited, but now, due to the massive area that we do have in a campaign, consider this is turn 11. And over here in 11 turns, I've been dealing with a lot of stuff. Granted, campaign customization, lots of resources, etc., but all the same, I'm managing a complex diplomatic game where I'm trying to keep everyone or the major factions at the very least, in the Aegean happy and trying to build an alliance as prime so we can beat the crap out of everyone else, as opposed to fighting a destructive war that will leave us vulnerable to, whoever may come. But it is a complicated task. You do have many things to worry about in a campaign, and I think this is one of the things that both Troy and Pharaoh did so very, very well compared to so many other games. On an idea level, at least. The execution of resources and other things does leave a lot to be desired. The AI is susceptible to cheesing in terms of diplomacy, region trading is broken, so on and so forth. Fair enough. There are issues. Pharaoh is not perfect. There's been improvements, but still not perfect. And I do think that there are things that they could continuously improve. However, it is great to have the dynasty aspect to, worry about the game of chess that you have to play here. Because it's kind of hilarious. You can be adopted in a dynasty, and then you can become Wanax or Pharaoh or King of the Universe without even having to fight the civil war, though you can certainly do so, or you can start in that position over there. Then you have to worry about your ancient legacy, in this case Perseus as an example. The benefit of Perseus is that I am able to do a recruitment from all of my allies, all of their kinds of units, so I can get a wide variety of units. Ancient Legacies add so much variety in a campaign. Of course, the problem is the execution of it. Basically, the merchant is a mechanic I feel should be available inherently in the game for every faction. It would make campaigns so much better if it was. Because right now, if you don't have the merchant, you're literally playing a nerfed campaign in comparison. So that is the downside when you're looking at a campaign as Pharaoh. It's, issues, the ideas are good, but it's like some of the execution, they basically need more time to cook. Like, this is my perspective, my overwhelming perspective about Pharaoh. I was very disappointed when it came out. But now I do see what, I see with this game, well, I'm going to say this. I see with this game the potential of greatness. I see the potential, like it's already a really good game to enjoy, to play. There's a lot of variety. Because as I said, if you're playing a campaign in the Aegean versus a campaign in the Hittite Empire versus a campaign in the Mesopotamian theater or in Egypt, you're going to have a very, very different experience between terrain, different types of units, different types of factions, the different courts, the various actions in that courts, the complexities of the court. When all of it is combined, it leads to a really intriguing campaign. I feel it could be much better, though, with allowing the player to have, say, multiple Ancient Legacies at the same time, because we would have multiple systems to worry about. I feel certain Ancient Legacies could be rebalanced, because having such a long cooldown timer to hosting games is a certainly limited aspect of Perseus. One of the problems that does exist with Dynasties is that you have systems that work great in the short term, but that are not that interesting in the long term. But then you have a campaign where inherently you're so limited in resources that the developers feel like they want you to play a long campaign of many terms, but that can get, let's just say it was really horrible at launch. It's much better, much more interesting, but you do have that clash right now. You don't have harmony between these various systems. Like the court, for instance, gets boring very quickly. Like you're just doing the same actions over and over and over again. It's a bit interesting early on. You do have various aspects to worry about, but once you got full control of the court, once you get the power of the crown, it does lose its interest very quickly. The power of the crown itself, I mean, I unlocked all the various powers here, but even the power of the crown has its, it falls into that same aspect. There are times when it does get very interesting. There are times when it gets dull. So that's what I mean here. There's a lot of potential for things to be a lot better. The god system does leave a lot to be desired. For what it's worth, I think Troy did this better. Yes, Aphrodite was significantly better than everyone else. Fair enough. That was a problem. But we still have that same issue here. Like, certain gods are just flat out better than others, right? I mean, absolutely, you do have variety. Like, you want to focus on range, you can go Apollo. You want to focus on sea domination, you go Poseidon, for instance. So they have rebalanced certain things around, to be sure, but something like Aphrodite is still really powerful because workforce growth is such an important system. So, again, balancing issues. There's also bugs with Ancient Legacies, with various systems, with the wives, because you're supposed to gain traits. I feel like one of the limitation here is like you have the ruling family, but you can't really arrange a marriage between your generals unless you're doing it through, diplomacy. Like you can ask a wife, but asking for a wife for diplomacy, even with factions that may not despise you, can be a bit of a problem, at least inherently, because the DLI evaluation is not necessarily going to be that great. Sure, yeah, you can always manage it with campaign customization, but I don't feel campaign customization should be the solution to all problems. But it's certainly carrying the game in a lot of ways at the moment. Not necessarily ideal, as I see it, but that is how the situation currently is with respect to all of this. Bit of a problem in that respect, bit of a problem with that. But this is what I mean about the clash between the developers wanting you to play a long campaign and having systems that don't work so well, like the gods, having limited, only one general per god, only having 3 gods, only having 1 ancient legacy, only so many powers in the courts, and so on and so forth. Like, the systems for an actual long campaign are just not really there, unless you want to believe the notion that, it can take you a long time to level up a single god.
Companion of Ares.
Also, you only have to worry about leveling up a god. You don't have to worry about constant favor with that god. So, bit of a downside than that. Like, a bit less interesting it could have been, I feel, from my personal perspective. But there are a lot of things that work. There are some things that do feel questionable about the game. And I gotta say this about campaign victory. By the way, the ending cinematics in this game, like, you look at the ending cinematics of Troy. The ending cinematics of Troy were great. I mean, limited, sure, but between the music, like, the music really sold that. The actual ending cinematic here can leave something to be desired. Of course, you do have the quote-unquote secret ending, but still, it just doesn't feel as impactful. Like, when I'm looking at, like, the ending cinematics that we have in Troy versus what we have in Pharaoh, yeah, I gotta say, I mean, it's better with Dynasties, to be sure. At least the ones I've seen. It's better in Dynasties with minor victory. I do gotta appreciate the victory conditions, because it's not like just, oh, conquer this many territories and you'll win. No. It's do a whole bunch of things. Foreign conquest, build cult centers, gain control of the court, get a certain amount of resources, all of that kind of stuff, right? Do ambition, get victory points from ambition, so on and so forth. So there are various ways of winning a campaign, various things you can do. The Sea People invasion, it's a gimmick. It's always been a gimmick, it's still a gimmick. So, in conclusion, Dynasties is a major step in the right direction. It has a lot of things I like, and it really is how the game should have probably been at launch. At the same time, there's still issues, not because of anything they did in Dynasties, but rather because of the issues they had at launch. They've added a lot, they've made a lot of varied campaigns in the major factions and the minor factions which you can play, and you have a choice between playing a campaign where you're playing with these quote-unquote historical figures, but then you can play a minor campaign and really have, this whole dynasty, where people die, and you can customize that so that people die far more often, and you're constantly swapping out generals. That can be interesting in its own right, because you have to worry about wives, you have to worry about the stability, you have to worry about leveling up generals. One problem with that, by the way, is the AI is really bad at leveling generals. I can't believe I'm going to say it, but some experience for free for the AI from the very beginning for its generals. Nowhere near the level of Warhammer 2, but some experience would be welcome, because, like, just encountering situations again and again where literally every general you're encountering is like a level 1 general. Yeah, it's not great. Like, there's obvious exceptions, but, like, consider this faction. Like, this faction has not lost a single general in battle. They've been at war, and yet all of their generals right here are very, very low level. And I'm pretty sure that's going to apply to my to other factions as well. So, yeah, that is questionable. I mean, there are certain situations where it's better, but when you see Achilles for being level freaking 1, yeah, you gotta wonder what the hell about that. Like, I think campaigns of battles would be more interesting if generals actually had, could actually level. Yes, I know there is an option in campaign customization to allow for generals at max rank and fully equipped generals, but I think that's not a great choice. Because I don't want generals at max level. I want the leveling. One of the things I think could be done better in that respect is, like, you could have generals being recruited at a certain level at various stages of the campaign. You can do this as a player, by the way. But, like, basically, let's say the AI starts at level 1, then at 10 turns they get level 5 every general, then 10, 15, all that. That kind of progression would make the campaign more interesting. Would certainly help make things more interesting. Same with resources. Like, give gradual free resources for the AI to actually use in its campaign. Would make things better. But all of these things, like, a lot of the issues that I do have are more so balancing issues than anything else, worth pointing out. The limitation on ancient legacies, the court, and gods, that is a feature. That's, something that I feel they should expand upon, but that's roughly it. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. Stay tuned